sort of who went and why people went to the West. Okay, usually it was younger people. They tended to emigrate as families. Okay, so depending on where you went. In some cases, it was single men. But there were reasons that pulled people to the West, and there were reasons that pushed people out of the East. And remember back when I was talking about the market economy and the rise of the market economy, right? And what the market economy brought with it was the business cycle, where there are times when business is very bad and times when it's very good, the sort of boom and bust. Well, in 1837, you have one of these panics, one of these depressions, one of these times when the market is extremely bad. And what that does is it throws a lot of people in the East into sort of financial catastrophe, lose their jobs, lose their houses, lose their investments, all that sort of stuff. And so from 1837 onward, there are very strong reasons why people would want to leave the East to try to go find opportunity elsewhere. Okay, so that's one of the things that would send people to the West. One of the other things that occurs is in particular in the 1840s, which we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next lecture, is you have the discovery of gold and silver in various places. You have gold and silver discovered in Colorado. You have gold struck in California in 1848. And the lure of sort of getting rich quick also brings a tremendous amount of people to the West. Now, we tend to have a kind of, much like slavery, we tend to have kind of a stereotypical kind of pop culture image of what the westward movement was like. Okay, and it usually goes something like this. It's, sort of everybody sitting in this huge Conestoga wagon, right, with, wheels that are taller than a 6-foot person, and all your stuff's inside and all the people inside riding west in a wagon train, right? In reality, that's not how it worked. And the other part of the stereotypical image is that you pick up somewhere, and say you're from Pennsylvania. You pick up somewhere in Pennsylvania and you move all the way out to California in one move. That's not exactly how it worked either. Okay. First off, you can't take a Conestoga wagon over the Appalachian Mountains back in this period. It won't work. It's too big. Okay. And so the wagons that people moved to the west of the Appalachian Mountains with, were wagons that were just big enough to get your possessions inside. Everybody else walked alongside the wagon. So that old picture of the covered, Conestoga wagon, that's actually a sort of a myth. Now, moving within a certain area, say you already live in, Kansas or Iowa and you want to move to Kansas, you could possibly do it that way, okay? But you couldn't move from, say, Kansas to Denver with it, because you'd have to go over the Rocky Mountains, and you can't go over the Rocky Mountains in those as well. Okay, the other thing is this idea of sort of picking up stakes, in Pennsylvania or Maryland or whatever, and heading all the way out to California or Nevada or something like that. In reality, the way this movement tended to work was in stages. Okay, and so you might have a family, decide that there's nothing left for them in New York, and they move to, Illinois. Okay. And then they're in Illinois for a long time, and after 10, 15 years, the family decides to move, or possibly the parents don't leave, but the children then decide to move on after 10, 15 years, and say they move from Illinois to Kansas, okay? And then after 10, 15, 20 years, for whatever reason, either the family or the children of the family decide to, pick up and move west of the Rockies to, Nevada or California or somewhere like that. It tended to happen in stages like that. The idea of people picking up and moving all the way across the country in a sort of transcontinental move, that was actually extremely rare. It really did not work like that most of the time. Okay, so what about life in the West? Well, if you moved west, for the most part, your life was going to revolve around one of three activities, one of three occupations. Either you went there to farm, you went there to engage in mining for gold or silver or something like that, or you went there to engage in ranching. And pretty much, with the exception of people who are living in towns, and even if you're living in a town, your occupations revolve around one of those three occupations. That is what you could expect as far as what you're going to the West to do. You're either going there to farm, particularly places like Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, places like that, the Dakotas, okay, or you're going to engage in this sort of get-rich-quick sort of idea, so, going to Colorado to mine for silver and gold, going to California, Nevada to look for gold, to engage in mining, and then finally ranching, places like Texas Oklahoma, parts of Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, definitely New Mexico, places like that. And this is what you could expect to do in the West. This is why people went. These were the ways in which you were going to go and make a life out there. You weren't going to go there and work in a factory or anything like that. All sort of factory activity in the 19th century is all going on in the East. Okay. All right. So finally, sort of the last thing to talk about is obviously with all of these people sort of streaming out of the East Coast and onto the Great Plains and beyond the Rocky Mountains, it's inevitable in a lot of ways. It's certainly likely, not inevitable, nothing's inevitable in history, but it's certainly likely that there are going to be clashes. Because if you're going to engage, particularly in farming and ranching, you're going to need a tremendous amount of land, okay? And even mining, you're going to need the land that the gold and silver are found on, right? The thing is, that land is under the control, is held by people who already live on the plains. We're talking about native people, Native Americans, who are the original inhabitants of the plains, the first migrants there. And this movement created it created new conflicts between whites and native people that in many ways echoed the conflicts that had gone on since Europeans arrived on the eastern coast of the United States in the 17th and in the 17th century. You had, again, settlers on the plains using the same methods that colonists had used: violence, fraud, coercion, all sorts of other, activities to try to take land from native people and use it for the purposes that people, moved to the West to use it for. And one of the best examples of this is an event that occurred due to the fact that gold had been found in Colorado. It's a thing called the Sand Creek Massacre. And what had happened was Colorado tended to be a major sort of homeland for, in particular, the Cheyenne. Okay, now there were Northern Cheyenne who lived in Wyoming too, but the Southern Cheyenne tended to live in what's today Colorado and Western Kansas. Okay, and over the years, they had signed various treaties with the U.S. government that had, by which they had agreed to live on reservations, and which had taken some of their land from them as a result of military conflicts, and also just as a result of land sales and things like this. And to the point that by the time you get to the 1860s, most of the Southern Cheyenne were sort of relegated to just Colorado. Okay, and the thing was, their reservation had gotten to the point where even though their treaty had said that they could still hunt buffalo, the fact that by the 1860s, because gold had been found in the foothills near Pikes Peak in the early 1860s, so many settlers had just sort of rushed to Colorado to find that gold. And many of them tended to hunt buffalo as a way to make money, that the buffalo were becoming scarce. And so you started to see many Cheyennes start to go off the reservation into their old homelands in Kansas and Oklahoma to try to find buffalo. And one particular group, under the command of a Native American named Chief Black Kettle, decide to do this, to leave the reservation in Colorado, to head sort of south and east to try to find buffalo. The problem is the government of Colorado has decided, sort of taken on a campaign that they want to encourage, because Colorado's not a state yet, it's a territory. They want to bring more and more people into the state so that it has enough population to become a state. And one of the reasons the government of Colorado wants to do this is because all of the leaders of the government of Colorado have bought up land. They're all land speculators. And so they're going to get rich if they can encourage people to come to Colorado so they can jack up the price of land and sell it to these people that are going to come there. And so in an effort to free up more land for whites to settle in Colorado, the government of the Colorado Territory takes on an official policy of sort of harassing the Cheyenne, particularly if they get off the reservation, because at that point they've then violated a federal treaty. Even though, never mind, it's not a state's job to enforce federal treaties. It's the federal government and the U.S. Army's job, okay? But anyway, the governor of Colorado decides to. He enlists the aid of a former Methodist minister who's a Civil War veteran, Civil War hero.